There comes a time in the life of every role player when their luck finally runs out. But that begs the question, what happens in your games when your heroes hit 0 HP? That question and more today on Writing and Role-Playing. Hey everyone, my name is JS Matthews and welcome back to Writing and Role-Playing. Today we're going to be talking about the concept of death and what happens to your player characters when they hit 0 HP. It's kind of an interesting little subject. I've been listening to a couple different people talk about it. I even got in a really interesting discussion with someone on Twitter about it who did not like the way I dealt with it, and so I figured, you know what? I'm going to make a video sharing kind of what I do and why I do it, and I thought that'd be kind of fun. I've seen a couple different takes on this. Obviously you have the death saves in 5e and all that fun stuff. For me, I do things a little bit differently. I like the idea of having a little bit more of a deadly game, but I don't want it to just be you hit 0 hit points and you die. I do like the idea of something like some sort of a wound system, but with also the chance of dying straight up, because I think that can happen. So let's go ahead and take a look at what I do, and we're going to start by going straight to the tabletop. Your ragtag group of survivors rumbles down the road in an old pickup truck after a successful scavenging expedition. Loaded with food, ammunition, and supplies, your goal is to return to your settlement as soon as possible. Suddenly, your car comes to a halt as fallen logs block the road ahead. With your truck low on fuel, you have no choice but to remove the obstructions. As you stand ready to move the fallen trees, the forest around you begins to teem with movement, and the moans of the hungry dead echo around you. So here's our scenario. Our survivors need to return with their supplies to their settlement, which is in desperate need of food and medicine. If they abandon their vehicle, that will leave our survivors and their allies in a dire position. Our survivors' goal is to remove the fallen logs while holding off the hordes of ravenous zombies. Let's take a quick look to meet our survivors. First, we have Phil. He's sort of the leader of the group as a former police officer. He's also equipped with a shotgun and a magnum. Dan is a firefighter, and so he specializes in melee combat, carrying with him an axe and 2 hatchets. Harry is a homeless veteran, and he was a sniper back in some war that happened before the zombies, took over. And he's equipped with a rifle and a pistol. Travis is a biker and was once a hunter, so he's equipped with a bow, a knife, and a pistol. Now for the scenario details. Zombies spawn in every turn and make their way towards the survivors from the edge of the board. To do this, I use spawn cards from the game Zombicide. Now the fallen logs are the main objective, but there are 3 of them to move. To move 1, the survivors need to pass a strength test of 24, and they are allowed to combine their tests as long as they are adjacent to the logs together. Each time they fail, they loosen the logs a bit more, and the subsequent test decreases by 1. So if they fail on the first try, the next test will only be 23, and then 22, and so on. Our group decides to send Travis and Dan to deal with the logs, as Dan has a +1 modifier to his strength, while Harry and Phil will hold off the zombies as best they can. Harry starts on top of the car, giving him an extra range to his shooting rolls, and Phil plans to handle things up close with his shotgun. Round 1 of combat begins as the zombies go first since they ambushed our players. The undead pour through the trees, hungry for the flesh of our surviving heroes, one of which is a massive creature with flabby flesh, while the others are fast-moving sprinters that dash forward ahead of the rest of the pack. Harry focuses on the runners while Phil aims for the closest enemies. Then, Travis and Dan manage to move the first log after failing in their first attempt. The second round begins with the dead closing in on the survivors. But they are met with a hail of bullets and 2 shotgun blasts from Phil. The massive zombie nears the truck, and Harry's rifle fire causes little to no damage thanks to the layer of flabby skin. Meanwhile, Travis and Dan failed to lift the second log, but managed to loosen it up quite a bit. Hopefully, they can finish it off next turn. The large zombie gets things started in the third round by charging forward, barely missing Phil, who passes an agility test and dodges out of the way. But instead, the wall of flesh collides with the truck, almost tipping it over. Harry fails his agility test and is sent hurtling through the air, where he crashes to the ground in the midst of the trees and suffers 1 damage. He now finds himself surrounded on all sides by the zombies. Meanwhile, Phil turns his attention to the large zombie and unleashes a blast from his shotgun using both barrels, finally downing the creature in a pile of maggot-ridden flesh. Travis and Clay successfully move the second log, but Travis decides to use his second action to turn and fire his bow at one of the zombies closing in on Harry. His arrow flies true and takes out one of the undead. Harry draws his pistol and fires at the closest zombie, missing his shot in his panicked state before using his second action to sprint towards the vehicle. Dan fails in his second attempt to move the third log by himself, bringing our third round of combat to a close. Our fourth round begins with another strange zombie appearing on the board. It shrieks and slobbers as it leaps between the treetops with a sickly green glow to its body. Next, the other zombies catch up with Harry, who swipe at him with their grimy fingers trying to tear flesh from his bones. The first zombie misses, but the second and third connect with their attacks, dealing 2 damage. That brings Harry down to 0 HP. This is where our wounds and death chart comes into play for the first time. Now at my table, Harry's player would do this while we moved on to the next player's turn to not slow down the game, but for the sake of teaching you how this works, we'll do it together. The first thing Harry's player has to do is to roll a d20 and consult our chart. Harry has no previous wounds and has no benefits to death resistance, so whatever he rolls is what he gets, and that means there's a chance that he could be killed outright, torn to shreds by the zombies. He rolls a 15, which means he suffers 1 moderate wound. Now we consult our second set of charts. This may seem overwhelming at first glance, so let me explain how this works. The first chart is the area of the body that is hit, and which part of the body suffers an injury. That means rolling a d4 for the arms, legs, torso, and head, followed by either a d12 for the head and arms, or a d10 for the legs and the torso. We roll a 4, so that means the wound is to our leg, so let's roll a d10 to find out where the wound is. That's a 7, so looks like it's our right foot, which means we are only going to be able to perform 1 move action per turn as long as we have this injury. Next, we have to determine the level of injury, and that is where the final sets of charts come in. First, locate the chart for the corresponding weapon or enemy type. In this case, it is the zombie chart. We need to roll a d8 to see what we suffer. We rolled a 7, which means we have suffered a bite to our right foot. Since it is a bite, we must immediately perform a constitution test to see if we are infected, and we receive a -2 to our roll according to the chart. Our infection test is a 14, and we rolled a 3. Yikes. Harry is now infected, which I won't go into here, but as you can imagine, it's bad. Harry goes back up to 1 HP and is now suffering from a bitten right foot, which will slow his movement. Normally, I would have my player roll all the dice simultaneously, and that way it goes extremely quickly while the other players do their turns. This way it doesn't slow the game down. Now that that is over with, the other players take their turns. Travis unleashes more arrows and drops 2 of the zombies that are attacking Harry. Dan tries but fails to lift the last log before calling for Travis's help again. Phil reloads his sawed-off before firing at the nearest zombie, nearly cutting the creature in half. The 5th round begins with the zombies closing in again, though none are close enough to deal any damage, but the strange, screeching zombie leaps forward again, before letting out a torrent of green acidic spray that narrowly misses Phil. The survivors then take their turns, with Phil covering Harry's retreat before helping his friend limp forward, granting Harry an additional move with his help, bringing them within steps of the truck. Travis and Dan fail in their first attempt to move the final log, but after using up their stamina, both manage to succeed on their next attempt, finally clearing a path for their escape. Now, if they could just reach their car. The 6th round of combat begins with the hordes pushing forwards within 1 move of the truck. The spitter in the tree vomits forth another torrent at Harry this time. His attack connects. The stream of hissing acid makes contact with Harry's back, dealing him 1 point of damage and pushing him back down to 0 HP. This time, Harry rolls, and it's a 5. Normally, he would just suffer 2 severe wounds and be bleeding out. But this time, he has a moderate wound, which means he suffers -2 to his roll, bringing him down to a 3. Phil watches in horror as Harry cries out in pain, screaming in agony as the acid completely consumes his midsection, dissolving his body. Phil lets go of his friend in horror as he gurgles and twitches as the acid spreads until there is nothing left but a slimy skeleton surrounded by melted flesh. Unfortunately, Harry is now dead. No saves, no resurrection scrolls. He's gone. The other survivors must make a sanity test at seeing this, with Phil suffering an additional -2 to his roll since he was the one holding Harry. I won't get into my sanity system just yet, so we'll have to save that for another video. Despite the horror they just witnessed at the death of their friend, the remaining survivors dash to the truck, with Dan slamming his foot on the gas pedal while Phil fires off his shotgun at the zombies that killed his friend, wounding the monster, but not killing it. Our survivors escape the horde with their supplies intact, but at what cost? So that is how I deal with players reaching 0 HP in my games. I think it strikes a good balance between the hardcore death at 0 HP and the newer death save systems. The fun thing about my system is that there is always a chance for death, which raises the tension and the danger of combat dramatically. And even if they don't die, the wounds they suffer take time to heal and can carry on for multiple sessions, if they are severe enough. Some of these wounds could be something like a severely smashed lower back, which would mean double the healing time for the wound and a loss of 3 inventory slots. Or they could suffer a minor puncture to their neck from a bullet, meaning part of the projectile is still in their wound, and they cannot use any items to help with the healing process until it is removed with a successful medical test. If they are really unlucky, they could end up suffering something like a completely gnawed right hand, which means it was bitten off and devoured, or a severed left knee from a raider's blade, losing their leg permanently. This leaves the players with a permanent effect from these fights and can lead to some cool role-playing opportunities, or even the retirement of a character if they can no longer function as an adventurer. These charts and system give a tangible consequence to combat and can really help curtail those murder hobos. Players will think twice about massacring a village if they know an errant arrow or an untimely critical hit from a farmer's pitchfork could spell their end. I am also working on a similar system for my fantasy games, both of which will eventually be available for you guys through Patreon when I decide to set one up. So if you like what you see, then soon you'll be able to try it out yourself. So this is how I deal with these things. But what do you do? Do you like my ideas, or do you do something different? Are you an old school hard-nosed player, where it's death at 0 HP, no saves? Or do you like the softer, newer systems with resurrection spells and death saves out the wazoo? Let me know in the comments what you think about my ideas, and also let me know how you do things. What do you like? Where do you think I'm wrong? And what piece of advice would you give me and other players? Thanks again for checking out my videos, and I really do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps out the channel, and honestly, it really helps me out. These take a long time to make and a lot of effort, and I would really love to keep making them, and it really helps just with the encouragement. Also, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I got plenty of other videos and a lot more coming your way. Anyways, I hope you all have a great day, and as always, good luck with all your writing and role-playing.